Necessity is the mother of invention. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Jay Shah, Vice President and Head Cultural Outreach Mahindra Group, Teamwork Arts and the Meta Secretariat, welcome back to this celebration of theatre and the concluding conversation at this magnificent virtual edition of Mahindra Excellence in Theatre Awards. As we almost come to the close of this virtual celebration, Meta 2021 has been really special, unique, and much needed. A walk down memory lane, which brought back some of the finest Meta-winning plays, was screened in the past few weeks. We have evolved, upgraded, and upscaled. The pandemic has, in a way, coerced everything, with whether successfully or not, towards the online. Not just education or work, but recreation, meetings, parties, and even personal dates have shifted from physical space to tiny little boxes on teleconferencing apps. In the midst of all of this, theatre has also been trying to create a space for itself in the online sphere, and watching theatre live has taken a new meaning of its own. To understand what goes behind taking a physical theatre online, we'll speak to some brilliant theatre artists who are at the front line of this scene. Once again, a very warm welcome to this conversation at the Meta 2021. Directing virtually, Guthrie, Neelam Singh Chowdhry, Quasar Padamsee, and Sunil Shanbag, moderated by Asad Lalljee. Theatre directors come together to discuss how they address the challenge of the digital divide and directed their shows virtually during the lockdown with the absence of physical rehearsals. How did their workshop process change? How did they adapt to the new small screen? Did their actors tone down their performances? How did they create magic? This is going to be a freewheeling conversation around creativity in the virtual world. Introducing to you our panelists for today. Bruce is the head of theatre and film at the National Centre for the Performing Arts. He has directed plays and musicals in London, New York, and all over the world. He has worked with several award-winning actors, athletes, and royalties on large-scale charity events, fundraisers, and concerts. Bruce trained as a director at the National Theatre Studio and under directors Howard Davis, Sir Richard Eyre, Deborah Warner, and Sam Mendes. Our next panelist, who's presently Professor Emeritus at the Punjab University. Neelam Singh Chowdhry has an MA in the History of Arts as well as a diploma from the National School of Drama. In 1984, she moved to Chandigarh, where she set up her own theatre company called The Company. She has also been the chairperson and taught in the Department of Indian Theatre, Punjab University. Neelam is the recipient of several awards, including the Padma Shri in 2011. Quasar is a theatreholic and lover of all things theatrical. Since 1999, he has directed and produced over 25 plays with Q2P, including Every Brilliant Thing, A Peasant of El Salvador, Project Strip, So Many Socks, Minorities, and many other about contemporary social concerns. Internationally, he has worked on Tim Supple's A Midsummer Night's Dream. He is a founding member of THESPO, a youth theatre initiative. At present, he serves on the Festival Committee of Tata Literature Live, the Mumbai International Lit Fest. Sunil Shanbag is a Mumbai-based theatre director and producer. He is the co-founder and artistic director of Theatre Arpana and Tamasha Theatre. Over the past 45 years, Sunil's work across various genres of theatre practice has been engaging with and presenting the complex nature of contemporary India on stage as well in various alternative performance spaces. His work spans across themes and issues that concern modern Indian society across class, caste, gender, and other inequalities. His major productions include Cotton 56, Polyester 54, Sex, Morality and Censorship, Stories in a Song, Loretta, Blank Page, Words Have Been Uttered, and most recently a reimagining of the 1945 iconic play by Prithviraj Kapoor, Diwar. In conversation with Asad Lalljee. Asad is SVP SR Group, CEO of Avid Learning, a public programming platform, and curator, Royal Opera House, Mumbai. Under Asad's leadership, Avid has distinguished itself with a variety of arts and cultural programs and is currently at the forefront of India's cultural hub. In 2016, he was appointed curator of the newly restored Royal Opera House, Mumbai, for which he has designed a robust program. In 2018, Asad was inducted into the FICCI Art and Cultural Committee. This conversation will be followed by a Q&A, so please feel free to send in your questions. Ladies and gentlemen, presenting, directing virtually, Guthrie, Neelam Singh Chowdhry, Quasar Padamsee, and Sunil Shanbag, moderated by Asad Lalljee. Asad, over to you.
Thank you, Suraj. Thank you, Sanjoy, Purnika, and the Teamworks team for having me here. I'm very excited to be part of this discussion. You know, it was in March of 2020 when the theatre industry and the rest of the world was put into a little bit of a pause. Initially, it was for a couple of weeks. There was uncertainty, gloom, doom, and you know what they say is struggle builds character. And improvisation is the heart of theatre, and many, including this distinguished panel, decided that the show must go online. Cut to July 21. The rest of the world is opening up slowly and steadily, some too fast. But in India, we're still, at least in Bombay, we're still waiting in the wings in hope to return to physical theatre. We did have a blink of normalcy in the middle, but that did not last. And we still don't have a definite answer when we are going to go back to that old normal that we all loved. But something happened in the earlier days of the pandemic. It was the beginning of a new chapter in the world of theatre. Collaboration was not a new phenomenon. Technology has been around for a while. We need to remind ourselves that Zoom wasn't created for the pandemic. It existed. Book My Show, Insider were already working on platforms. It existed. It simply became a part of the tools in our toolkit. To discuss this new beginning and how an essentially traditional format of storytelling took a virtual route, we will be in conversation with these very accomplished directors who have doing some amazing path-breaking work virtually. During this discussion, we'll examine how this new virtual avatar is building or adding to the theatre culture. Is it helping grow the industry, or is there digital fatigue? Are there sustainable ways to coexist with the traditional format? I'm sure you've heard Suraj talk about Meta's numbers of reach and viewers and how successful this festival has been. But it's about how we use technology to extend our reach and expand the definition of what theatre is. Needless to say, our panel will be made to look into this crystal ball, which I'm holding, you can see, and do some future gazing about this vibrant and much loved industry. I'm going to start with Dr. Neelam Singh Chowdhry. She's asked me to call her Neelam, so I'm going to do just that. Can we have her promo, please, Ankit, and then I'll ask. Um, Neelam, we spoke and you shared such interesting insights. I read somewhere you called yourself a technology refugee, and you actually mentioned it in conversation earlier with Sanjoy also. So how has been your professional experience, dealing with this new normal and directing? I mean, you're used to directing these large live ensemble productions, to directing Black Box, a very powerful monologue that was projected virtually.
Well, as Suraj said right in the beginning, that necessity is the mother of all inventions. So taking from that truism that he expressed, I would like to say that when the pandemic happened, one just felt it would be an interruption. One didn't know that it would be here forever. That's the feeling one has at the moment. I think at some point one got restless, and one felt that the only space in which one really feels alive, if you've been in theatre for as many years as a lot of us have been, is when you're in a rehearsal space with other actors breathing, responding, working on improvisations, creating. Now, all that was not available during the pandemic. I think maybe one would have continued in the state of inertia that a lot of us had got into. It was like a no man's land, where you felt the land was lying fallow till things started happening. I think what really became the catalyst was a commissioned project by Ranga Shankara asking me to do some work during the pandemic. Now, I'm used to working, as you have already shared, with an ensemble cast, 12 musicians, 15 actors, music, lights, the whole stuff that goes into theatre making. But new ways had to be found. I don't think I directed digitally, that I was physically with my actor, maintaining certain protocols of distance. But we worked I have a small studio in my home. So we wondered what we should do, because the overwhelming feeling of what was happening around us raised any possibility of anything else. Normally what happens when you are going through a fractured crisis, there is no way that you can incorporate that into a creative experience, because you need time, distance to be able to process it. But this was actually at your doorstep. You felt it had entered through your threshold. There was no way you could escape the reality and the horror and the brutality of what was happening around us. Mm-hmm. So I think what became the trigger for the play was Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. So that became the starting point through which all the images that were assaulting us at that point of time transformed and went into this production. It was very strange that, every time the actor had to transit from one inner journey to another inner journey, I would say, when the musicians come, we can use some musical piece to create the transformation. And then I realized there's going to be no musicians, it's a very special period. Even though, innovative ways of what kind of new decisions, new creative choices, a new kind of space I was in. I was forced into, or the circumstances had placed us in. Even though it was theatre, it was not in front of a live audience. But all the tools that went into making it were tools and trainings and skills that one had chiseled and nurtured. Sorry.
No, it's very interesting. This was either shot or projected in black and white. Why was that a conscious decision? And I know the name is Black Box, but obviously that's got nothing to do with it.
My son is a filmmaker, my younger son. So he was kind of going to film it. And it was basically his choice, but I was completely in agreement. It seemed right. It didn't seem to make me feel that something had got lost. I think something had I think the time was so much black and white that it seemed almost like the lack of color or the draining or the expunging of color became a metaphor for the kind of feelings that we were all experiencing. And we didn't have a script. It was all a devised piece of work. Numbers actually became the running dialogue. I saw the numbers as the navaras, that through numbers, you're actually expressing all kinds of emotional, because, what were you hearing on television? What were you reading in the newspaper? Numbers, numbers, numbers. Quite forgetting that behind each number was a life, was a family destroyed, was a person who was suffering, hungry, trudging, no transportation, mobility, yet immobile. So we used all the images and of course it was translated with very limited means, because the space we used, I wanted to show the claustrophobia of being incarcerated. So the space we used was 10 foot by 5 foot. And within that, the dreams, the fantasies, the fears, desire to go for a walk, simulating rain, imagining the food that he would like to eat, but coming up with a little sandwich, which obviously was given in some kind of food camp, where humanity asserts itself because you're sharing it with a dog and a sparrow. And the protagonist, we said who is he? Who else could he be but an actor? So he sets up a stage, tells a story. We used a local folk tale, which is familiar to everyone, which is about a bird who something has got stolen, and she goes to different people more powerful than her. So in a certain way, we tried to take the story out of its populist mode and tried to, in a certain way, show the helplessness in which we are all
together
hammered into. Yeah. That where we appeal here, we appeal there, but nothing is available. Right. So I tried to use all the feelings that my actors were feeling, I was feeling, what we were reading, what we were sharing, experiencing, absorbing, and try to put that into this play.
Wonderful. I mean, I'll come back to you. I have many more questions for you.
I think I took too much time.
No, don't worry. I'm going to move on in the interest of time. We have only 1 hour, and I'm sure we'll have many audience questions coming up. So I'm going to go over to Sunil next, and I'm going to request Ankit to play his promo so I can have a chat with him.
करना तुम मन के बात 21 दिन 20 रात.
So censorship, we're going to be talking really about censorship.
ये बीच के शब्द कहाँ है?
सेंसर के कट्स. अबे चूतिए.
Sakharam binder को लेके लोगों को इतना गुस्सा क्यों आ रहा था? Why was there such a hostile response to Sakharam binder?
And he wanted to be remembered that way as a man who did the right thing, took harsh decisions, and perhaps he did not want to be lionized or tenderized by history.
Join me and Sharmishta Saha as we start by mapping Mumbai's early theatre history. Listen to Vishnudas Bhave talk about his first impression of Bombay's European-style Grand Road Theatre in 1853. All this and more in Theatre Nama with Sunil Shanbag.
Sorry, guys. I'm in the dark because I'm in Lonavala and my power just went off, but my computer is working. Sunil, you've been really busy virtually. You had 21 Din or 20 Raat, Sex, Morality and Censorship, playing it to Bombay, which is part of Theatre Nama. So could you tell us your experience of directing online for Theatre Nama and the idea behind this platform?
Yes, of course, Asad. First of all, this is a wonderfully theatrical moment. So, it's wonderful. Okay. So, when the first lockdown happened, that was the 3-week lockdown. And we thought, after 3 weeks, everything would be fine. But my partner and co-founder at Tamasha Theatre, Sapan Saran, who's a director, she was very keen to document lockdown stories. That during those 3 weeks, what were people experiencing? So she did extensive interviews with a large cross-section of people from different, classes of society, and tried to understand what was going on in their minds, in their life situation at that time.
and then she converted them into kind of fictional scripts. Characters. They were fictional characters, and we got a bunch of our actors together who shot themselves playing these parts, and we created a 4-part series called 21 Din 20 Raat, and we really rushed through it because we wanted to complete it before the 21 days, because after that it won't make sense, little knowing that after that, that's when the real the things really started happening. So when the lockdown extended and we realized that we are in it for a while, we actually went very quiet for a couple of months. I used the opportunity to really read about what's been happening in digital art over time. It's not something that we were familiar with, and I felt I needed to understand what's been going on in digital art. And it was very interesting because most of it has happened in the experimental domain. We are not really from that kind of experimental kind of work. So we are trying to understand how we can actually participate, what we can do. And we run a space called Studio Tamasha, which is a kind of a curated space. And we then said that let's see what of our activity can move online, right? And secondly, what can we do in which the largest number of actors could get involved? This was by around July, August, when things were easing just a little bit in Mumbai, and we could move around a little bit. And we realized that actors were extremely restless. They needed something. Morale was down. So we said, let's use this to bring people together. So we talked to Insider. I mean, you mentioned Insider. It was really interesting what was going on at that time. And we asked them to give us a space on the platform, which would be our Studio Tamasha, a virtual Studio Tamasha, where we could list all the things that were available and anybody could come and choose what they wanted to watch, right? And so, you saw on some of the little film that ran, we ran a program called New Writings, where we take the works of new young writers, playwrights, bring in actors and do dramatic readings of these. So that moved into the podcast space because one of our actors was very keen on the idea of podcasts, and he informed me, as ignorant as I am about these things, saying that, listen, podcasts are the thing of the future. So we went into podcasts. We run a program that's readings from Urdu literature. And that moved very nicely, very seamlessly onto the online space, both recorded and live. It happened simultaneously. And then, of course, there was, Theatre Nama that we talked about. The first thing that we did was a guided viewing of Sex, Morality and Censorship. Now, because the process of making that play was so interesting, and I am really interested in sharing process with audiences. I really believe it's important and audiences are interested. So we did, the people who were involved in the making of the play, the actors, the writers, everybody came together and we led an audience of about 250, 260 people showed up through the process of making the play and showing excerpts from the play, fairly lengthy excerpts, so that they had, even those who hadn't seen the play could understand what was going on. That gave us a little bit of confidence. And then Theatre Nama 2 was really playing to Bombay because, I'm a history buff. And I realized that while reading about what was going on in the city, I realized that in 1896, Bombay was hit by the plague, and exactly what's happening in COVID time happened in Bombay at that time, right? Everything shut down, various things that were going on. And I just thought it would be interesting to trace the history of theatre from 1750 onwards to 1896, when we hit a dead end, when everything shuts down, and there is a new technology. And that time it was cinema, the first cinema things that started, and we had the digital thing. So we ended at that point. So yeah, that's basically what we did. It was a very busy time. We worked non-stop until about September, October. Audiences had started dwindling by then. And luckily in November, we were given the go-ahead to start performing live again, which we started doing immediately. We were given permission. Yeah.
Editing and uploading have become these new phrases and phases in theater production lately. I mean, I've been reading a lot about it, and a lot of people I speak to have been saying this. And you've used animation and dramatic recreations quite well in your productions. So how has the use of technology enhanced the online theater experience?
Well, Asad, I think that I had a bit of an advantage because I've been a filmmaker for many, many years, right? And shooting something, recording audio, editing comes quite easily to me because I've done that for a long time. What was a little disconcerting was actually trying to have a conversation between two people who are not in the room together, right? Who are in, like, you'd expect that we are, on Zoom and there are two windows, and can we not speak to each other and perhaps read a scene? And, this whole latency business, this whole lag, this time, that part of the technology was very disconcerting. And the other thing is that doing online work is about 5 times more work than doing live. After online, live seems so easy. I mean, it's just wonderful. So it was, it was both things actually.
All right, thank you. I'm going to come back to you. I'm just going to move on to Bruce in the interest of time. Bruce, I mean, besides being a director, you also represent one of the most iconic institutions in India, the NCPA. Theatre has gone virtual, accessibility is undeniable, all that fun stuff. With regards to your production of Seawall, directing a monologue featuring Jim as Alex, can you tell us a little more about your experience of this particular production, and whether it was, how many cameras set up and how was it done? And then I want to talk to you about your more current production after that. So could we start with Seawall?
Yeah, sure. I think that we would have I think we're going to play a promo of it as well, just before we actually talk about it.
Ankit, do you have a promo, or do you have only slides?
The first thing I learned about photography, I learned when I was a kid. When you're taking a portrait photograph, if you possibly can, then take it from below the subject. It renders the subject, actually oddly, what it does is it renders the subject not more heroic, not more godlike. Oddly, it renders them more human. And if you can take it in natural light, if you can capture the way the light falls at the start of or at the end of a day especially, then it can be
Okay, yeah, so with Seawall is that what we wanted to do was to capture the essence of it being a live show, but we were filming it without an audience. So so rather than film it in a kind of like in a traditional way within a theatre, is that we chose to flip things around and to have the empty Tata Theatre, which you can see in that promo video behind Jim Sarb, who performed this monologue by Simon Stevens. We had done the show as part of the Ad Art Festival marking 50 years of the NCPA. We had done that in December of 2019, and the show had gone down incredibly well with the audiences. So we always had an intention to bring it back. But then with the pandemic, the NCPA launched its NCPA at Home series, which was running on YouTube for 2 to 3 months, a bit like what Sunil was talking about earlier. So it was a way of us staying connected with our audiences. And during that time period, we've had many discussions about how we want to present things online, but also how do we continue to do that even post-pandemic? What are the lessons that we can learn in terms of the way in which work is presented? There's a unique opportunity at the moment, when we're allowed to film again and when we're allowed to have actors back in theatre spaces, to be able to capture content in a way that isn't quite the same as what it will be when we have a live audience in. So that kind of Metropolitan Opera, National Theatre Live type thing is what we will eventually be aiming for with all of our genres at the NCPA. But with the pandemic itself is that we've been able to work with companies like Book My Show. Frames was the name of the company that we worked with to shoot Seawall. And we did it with a multi-camera approach. So there were 4 cameras there. And what we did was that Jim and I rehearsed the play at the NCPA with social distance and with masks and everything. And then when it came to actually shoot it, we did a day's worth of rehearsal with the cameras. So we had them in the space and lit the play. The theatre design team were also involved in that process. And then the following day, we shot the play 3 times. So Jim got 3 complete runs of it, and it was shot multi-camera, and then it was edited after that. And the feeling was to keep that sense of continuous performance throughout it. It wasn't one bit from the first performance, one bit from the second, one bit from the third. It was all the one continuous performance there. And it was very, very well received, and we learned an awful lot through doing it, because I think that's been one of the big things about this pandemic and the switch to this kind of digital theatre, is that it's all learning and it's all growing and progress.
Wonderful. I mean, tell us more about your more recent production of Hell Momentarily, I believe with the Royal Academy of Music. What was your process like out there?
So with Hell Momentarily, it's a musical, and it's a new musical. And what we wanted to do with that was shot on Zoom. So what we wanted to do with that was something that didn't feel like it was a kind of like a Zoom play. We wanted to see if we could experiment a little bit and push the boundaries with technology a little there. And I think we'll see some slides of that in just a second. But what we did with that was we sent the actors kits. So we sent them a lighting kit and a green screen, a pop-up green screen that they could assemble in their own
Share a few of those
room.
images, Ankit, while he talks. Thank you.
Yeah, so we sent them these green screens. So each of the performers that are in this shot are all in their own houses, and they just pop the green screen up, and they'll work with a video designer called Gillian Tan, who did a tremendous job of creating the sense of them being on a subway train. It was very difficult, as Sunil said earlier on, is that it's, you know, at least 3 or 4 times more difficult to do this kind of work on Zoom. But then when you add into that, they have to have a 2-camera setup, because they've got the camera that they're going to film themselves on, and then they've got the camera which I'm looking at them through. So I was looking through a camera at a viewfinder, watching them do stuff. And you add a musical element into it as well with a click track, and they're singing to a click track. And then there's lag as well. So it was pretty difficult. But what we ended up with was something that looked pretty good. And they sounded great as well, because they had their own recording equipment there. It was just little portable stuff that they did it all on. And then I worked with the editor on it, with the video designer who also edited it. And what she had really was 8 complete films of material. And she had to edit all of that data together, which took a long time to do. But we ended up with something that looks, you know, unique. And it certainly, you know, was a different process for everybody who was involved in it. Complicated, but, you know, but we learned loads doing it.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing this. I'm going to just move over to Quasar right now. Can we have Quasar's promo, please, Ankit?
So, like I was saying, the list began.
Thank you. So Quasar, you have successfully staged 3 virtually directed projects. We saw on the promo, some of them, Everything Brilliant, Lunch Girl, sorry, there I go again. You know, when we spoke, you mentioned that there's a difference. Virtual theater is not theater, but it's performance. It's a completely different grammar. And I remember writing this down. So could you share your insights with respect to these 3 performances and your work?
So, I mean, you know, it's a weird thing. We all talk about theater online, etc. You know, in this pandemic, and this happened pretty much. I think week 2 of the pandemic or week 1 of the pandemic, everyone with a djembe and a guitar had started performing and poetry, and actors wanted it out there, etc. And when we began work actually on Every Brilliant Thing, which was an existing play that we were now converting to an online space, we had a couple of big learnings. One was we actually realized, so my entire life I've always thought that theater was, relationship between actor and audience. And, that's been really the connection between, on stage and off stage, and that connection. And we were performing Every Brilliant Thing live. It was going to have, it wasn't a recorded kind of show. It was absolutely live, and it was going to happen. And remarkably, at the end of the first rehearsal, we were disconsolate and desolate, because what we realized is actually when you do a piece of theater, and especially when you mount it for an audience, the relationship is not only actor to audience, it's also audience member to audience member. It is a communal experience that we are receiving, and which is why I come to the fact that yes, it is a lot of theater people doing online performances, but I don't think that what we do is theater, because we do not have that physical, tactile connection, both in terms of space to each other, to actor and audience, but also to audience member to audience member. It is one of the few one-to-many experiences that we have left. Our mobile phones and our Netflixes have made us all make more and more one-to-one experiences. Cinema seats are, bigger and trying to push out the people that are watching the film with you. But in the theater, you have low backs, you're fully aware of the other audience members around. And working on Every Brilliant Thing really brought that home. And the other thing, which I'll agree with what Sunil said, which is it becomes infinitely much harder, because just like I am doing right now, and the difference between if we were all in a room together, I'm actually projecting a little bit and pushing forcefully to make my point across. So both as actor and as director, talking to an actor, you're no longer just relaxed. You're trying to fight through the medium and push your point across, and it becomes quite hard. And it also means that what otherwise you could have spent, time in a room over 6 hours and have chai together, and there's all this soft stuff, all that is gone. So rehearsal periods also became shorter, because the demand is so much more from both actor and audience. You're pushing constantly. So these were some of the things that we learned very, very quickly when we were working. And then the 3 pieces I create that I was lucky enough to work on. One was recorded and was a monologue for one-on-one, which was the closing clip that we saw. And that was very difficult. As Bruce mentioned, that was recording with one which is actually recording it, and another Zoom chat, which is actually where I'm actually looking at it, and you have to assume the difference between that. And that was that's a project which is 1 camera, 1 take, 1 actor, and that's what gets presented. So it was fun because you kept running it again and again and again, and both she and I we kept saying, man, we want to just do the show live. Like, why are we recording it? There's an instinct that we have. But when I was working on another show, which I actually created from scratch for the medium, which was Lunch Girls, that was very difficult, because that was an hour-long show with 4 actors who weren't in the same room. They were all in their own homes. So that kind of interaction, that kind of chemistry, is very, very tough to do. And the soft conversations, the conversations that aren't specifically, text or director-led, the conversations that you have over chai, that you're just chatting about character or chatting about things, you miss all of that. So like someone said this quite beautifully, like Zoom and all of these are actually these are like us doing theater in banquet rooms. These were conference rooms. These were built for office purposes. We as theater people, like we do when we take a show to an office building, we will convert it into what we want to do. In exactly the same way, we've done that with this technology, which we've tried to convert it.
But everything brilliant you converted in the physical form, you convert it to an Indian context. So how did you further adapt it for an online audience? Because
so it was really funny. When we started working on Every Brilliant Thing, way back when it was a piece of theater and a live show, we were trying to find how do you present something without artifice. It's actually a very beautiful story about a man talking about the fact that his mother has depression and she tried to kill herself, and then he starts a list about every brilliant thing in the world to cheer her up, and then how that list influences his life. So we wanted to create something that was absolutely without artifice, and we thought we'd achieved something like that in the theater experience. When we tried to convert it onto the Zoom experience or into a digital experience, our rules, the same show didn't exist anymore, because if we did that same thing, it felt very artificial. It felt like someone else capturing it, and it is a show where he talks to the audience constantly and directly. So one of the things is we kept it like a Zoom meeting, so everyone is actually part of that meeting. And we limited our audience to only, I think, about 70 people per performance, and he genuinely talks to everyone. But the other thing we did in terms of trying to find lack of artifice, like we were experimenting with different kinds of houses that we could stage the show, because he was in Bangalore, I was in Bombay, the stage manager was in Nagpur, someone else was in Lucknow. We were all over the place. And we were then trying to figure out what does lack of artifice mean? And the decision was taken that basically lack of artifice means it has to be that character's house, and that character's house as that actor's house. So it literally was his home, and he, at the beginning of the show, actually welcomes everyone to his home and to listen to the story, and then he starts telling the story. And in terms of blocking as a theater process, it was great, because if he felt like he needed a cup of coffee, he picked up the laptop and took them to his kitchen and served, made himself a cup of coffee while he kept talking. And then there were things that we discovered, like there was a tree outside the window that meant a lot to him when he rented this apartment. So there are a couple of scenes, for example, where he places the camera so that you can see the tree. And unlike Sunil or Bruce or I didn't have any background in the cinema at all, or in camera work. So for me, it was really just trying to discover and stumble blindly through it, and it was tough. Especially because we were also trying to do it live, and we were trying to take out as much artifice as possible. And I know that Vivek talks about this, because in a weird way, for example, right now I'm looking on my Zoom screen, which is what we're using to broadcast. I'm looking at you, Asad, but that means I'm not looking. The audience doesn't realize I'm looking at you. They don't see that. So, for example, Vivek had to look at camera in order for the audience to feel that they were being looked at, even though he wasn't looking at them. And that was really tough. So you're adding artifice in order to display lack of artifice. It was really complicated. And give me the theater any day.
And then there was light. Sorry, but I was listening to a very interesting panel discussion this morning on Meta, and Annie said, you have to hold the individual's attention in the online medium throughout, because in a blink of a second you can lose them. There's so many alternates available. So, I have many questions, but in the interest of time, I'm going to race through with them. So I'm going to encourage you all to give me shorter answers. Building an audience in the online space is not exactly as easy as everyone thinks it is. And I know I've spoken to some of you all, and I love my Netflix CEO comment. He says, my only competition is sleep. And I mean, now you mentioned Netflix, Amazon, you're the best of world theaters. You have everything available on your screen. Most of it at very, very affordable cost, or free, or, so how it's much harder to get people online, right? Sunil, I'm going to start with you. I mean, do platforms like, you went to Insider for your first project, but do platforms like Insider and Book My Show help you get these numbers and traction?
Well, I think one of the most sobering truths that you realize is that if theater, or the kind of theater you do, if it's marginal in the real world, it remains marginal online as well.
So welcome to the reality, right? All these things about 1 million views is a myth. It doesn't happen. All right. So that's the first sobering thing. Of course, it's very exciting that people sitting very far away geographically in other cities, in other countries can watch. That's very exciting. Yeah. But this is the reality. And secondly, you are also in the middle of a lot of clutter. It's how do you put yourself out there on one of these platforms, whether it's Book My Show or it's Insider, and there are 500 things happening around you. Somebody comes there, they have so much choice. How do you drive them to come and watch your piece of work and not something else? And that's very, very hard. People who build audiences online for whatever, it could be for commercial products, spend a lot of money and a lot of time on campaigns, and we've never had that kind of money. So I believe that we have to find another strategy. I believe that we need our own platform, so that somebody comes there knowing that they're coming there for theater, not just say, let's see what is on today, is a stand-up comedy or a cooking show or whatever. And I think that's going to be the future if you want to build an audience.
Sure. Bruce, just turning over to you. I mean, how do you capture these young audiences or just audiences and retain them and have them coming back for more, whether it's in the physical or actually more in the online and the physical space?
I think that's probably more of a question for Quasar, really, with his THESPO background,
I've got another
great work that they do. But I think that it's about engagement as much as anything else. It's about making people, it's the age-old challenge of making people believe that the theatre is for them. It's one of the oldest art forms that, in human existence. It's been around for a long time. It will be around long after all of us have gone. It's, that thing of the digital lessons that we've been learning over the past 18 months will hopefully stand us in good stead for this to evolve into something else. I don't think it's done yet, and I don't think that in anything that I've seen so far that anyone has kind of like cracked it whereby that you saw that and think that is a thing that can exist, kind of like sort of as a kind of like in the way that in the way that televised sport exists, but live sport is still a thing in itself. I think that we need to find what the uniqueness of the online and the home experience is with us, as well as what that live experience, because the live experience is the thing that we all live for. It's like Quasar was saying earlier, it's the relationship not only of the audience and the performer, but the audience to audience interaction. It's the reason that people still go to the cinema when you've got amazing kind of like 4K televisions and surround sound. It's, we are communal by nature. We like to be around other people. And I think that if the last 18 months has taught me anything, it's how much I maybe took that for granted and how much I need it in order to be able to exist.
Right. Thank you. Quasar, we spoke and I know you kind of echoed Sunil's, comments, so I didn't come straight to you. But you could talk about that also. But, in this last 18 months, has a lot of new work been commissioned? Because there's been these spurts, right? There's the first phase, the second wave, there's that in-between wave. So what has been the lay of the land, essentially?
I think there was if we're looking at the first response was very much an individual response. I think a lot of artists suddenly wanted to be relevant, didn't want to be forgotten. There was almost a nostalgia. So a lot of artists were creating any work they could, monologues, things like that. Like if you look at a Facebook feed, it felt like an audition catalog. Everyone is doing a 10-minute piece or a 15-minute piece from the confines of their home. And that was fantastic because that's also an expression. That's also people trying to get it out there. Sure. Then I think a lot of the theatre companies started, again, in this nostalgic mode, started mounting productions that they had shot often quite badly because they weren't designed for this. And they started doing these archival kind of releases of older productions. What Sunil's done with Sex Morality is one step further from that, where you're looking at archival material and then having another perspective on that, which then takes that argument forward. But there was some interesting stuff. The other thing also to note is that technology itself has evolved in this last 6-8 months. I remember being incredibly frustrated with Zoom when we started in June last year, which is exactly a year ago, because you couldn't spotlight two people at one time.
Yeah.
And now you can. Just to give you, an example of that. And then arts per square foot formed, which is for musicians, which is trying to make sure that sound and that quality is good, because Zoom sound is not great, and all these plugins have started happening. Everyone's kind of now learned about OBS and vMix and things like that. But what is remarkable is actually not all of us who are trying to recreate a theater experience, and we're really theater people trying to do online stuff. But there's a whole other generation, and they're much, much younger than us, who are just looking at it and saying, okay, this is how I have to perform. Let me figure it out. And that is quite remarkable. I mean, some of the work that I have seen, I think there's a new grammar that's coming out, which is different. And it's tending towards Bruce was saying, where this is going to be something that will last even once the theaters are open. It's a new form. It's a new thing. What we saw within the THESPO context, right, which was some of the innovation that there's a beautiful director called Ritika Shirotri from Pune who did incredible stuff. One play was staged in a theater, had all the grammar of theater, but it wasn't a play because they were using multiple cameras and it was still live. They were cutting in between and using software brilliantly. And then another piece she did where she was performing, which was set in a photo studio in Madurai, where she's talking to you and then she turns around and then she turns back, and now that whole room has been converted into a restaurant, which is same disciplines of theater. Backstage, people are running in, putting tables in, changing the drapes, doing all of that in the blink of an eye, as they would, on stage. But it's a different form. It's something else. There's a different level of excitement, and it's an excitement because it's live. You know that it's just happened. So there is remarkable stuff. If you look at Ram and Malika's Hidden in Plain Sight, which has just happened, that itself is quite, it's a different grammar. The grammar is evolving. It is a grammar that has the sensibility of theater, but is not theater and is trying to become something else. But I will also agree with Sunil saying our pool of audience is small. It remains small. And even though we say there is this whole world out there, and I mean, some of the stuff that Red Curtain are doing in Calcutta is fantastic. They've done really consistent kind of stuff. But the pool is still small for the kind of work we do. And yes, we can't compete with the Netflixes and the other guys. But we are pushing an envelope and becoming something a little more interesting, I think.
What you said is very interesting, and I want to Neelam into this because because of the teaching aspect. I think you also mentioned this. I mean, students coming out of theatre.
I think we lost Asad for a second. But I think what he was talking about is actually something that he and I had spoken about earlier. So I'm just going to jump in and talk about it. And I think this is a question for Neelam ma'am, which is basically, we've had 2 years of students who've come out of drama schools and stuff, but with no theater for them to practice. There are no places where they can, go and do that. And is that going to be a marked difference in maybe the theater losing students, because once they taste the joy of short film series or cinema, will they then not come back to the theater? Because when they come out of drama school, they're all full of josh, and they have places where they can experiment with their craft. Neelam ma'am, any thoughts?
Well, I think it is such a complex.
Sorry guys, I'm back.
He's back.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. Just where am I? But Neelam, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Sorry if I missed it. And also, besides,
I think we've lost him again.
Neelam ma'am, I think you can just go because he's saying the same.
I think it's quite a complex situation, and there's no easy answers. I mean, I do know, because I've been teaching for the last 30 years, I do know that most of the students, young actors, are in a complete state of confusion and uncertainty. Because what happens is that no productions are taking place that can absorb a large number of actors. So what I find very interesting is that, when you train yourself to be an actor for the modern theatre, you don't have traditional tools in which you dip into. It's not a Kuriyatam training, or it's not Kalari, or it's not Tayyam or whatever. So which means that they find each director gives them certain exercises, and each actor also, as he does some self-training, finds a way of honing his skills in this interim period. In fact, it's strange that this question should come to me, because yesterday 2 actors came by and stayed on for dinner, and they said for the last couple of months they've been doing this and they've been doing that, and they've been working on their voice, doing a self exercise on training themselves. So because we do know that theatre is about community. It's about a group of people getting together. We also know that it's not about in a segregated world. This is one space where people come together and work. And there's bohomi, there's a chai pani that you talked about. I know when the pandemic was announced, I was in Delhi at the NST doing a production. And suddenly after a week, the institution closed down and I came back, but they had to, there's a syllabus and there is marking and there is examination. So I was told to do it online, to create this production digitally. And it was really it was right in the first 10 days of the pandemic. I made a whole worksheet. I kind of structured a way of working. I gave certain exercises. Then they would send me their stuff. Then I would look at it. Then I would make notes, and but it was very cold. It wasn't about touch and smell. And I'm of the generation, maybe on the last phase of my life, where I don't think that I know how to enter into this new terrain. It's a very, you have this, it is going to be a new hybrid form. It's going to be a new kind of collaboration. It is going to be a sub-genre. But I don't think it's going to be theatre, at least as far as my thinking goes. Maybe as you're talking about the younger generation, to me, you're the youngest generation that I can think of doing theatre. So if there's a younger generation than that, I think they're really very concerned. And even when selection, I know what's happening in the drama department in Chandigarh and at the NST. You can't do online classes. You can't teach people online. It's a very inadequate, compromised form of interaction between a teacher and a student. It can happen in history. It can happen in English. It can happen in other disciplines. But I don't know. I just feel I need to touch my actors. I need to smell my actors. They need to smell me. It has to be choreographed. There has to be a group of people. So it is to me a very complex field. There are no easy answers. I must believe that this is not going to be forever. This is an interim period. Within that interim period, we're not dying. And we are finding ways and we are finding methods to keep ourselves alive, to keep our expressions going. So this really talks about human affirmation, that we still feel, no matter how difficult the times, we affirm ourselves by saying, we will do something. So it is that kind of space I personally feel is what is being explored. And because we're exploring it, we're trying to find ways and means, bits and pieces to communicate, to connect, to still feel that we live in a world, because no man is an island.
Sure. Sorry about me disappearing. It's Murphy's Law, as they say. But we're in the process of kind of wrapping up. I've got lots of questions coming. And so in the interest of time, I'm just going to jump into a few questions. And Anju asked that what kind of scripts work in the digital format. Sorry, this never happens, but it's happening today. And that's one question even I had is the content. I mean, we've all been living through this pandemic for the last 18 months, and we've all been influenced. I remember when I lived through 9/11 in New York, everything we saw was there was a hint of 9/11 in it after that. What kind of scripts will work in the online space? I mean, and anybody, Bruce, do you want to, because you're just doing something new, I believe.
Yeah, I think we're still figuring it out, really. I think that, that great stories are great stories, and that new writers will begin to emerge and write things for this, but that also, I always think that with any play is that the writer writes and imagines, and then it's my job as a director to, figure it out with my creative team to figure out how to interpret that, because we're interpretive artists, really. Unless you're a playwright or that you devise the piece from scratch, we're interpretive artists. So I think it's just people want great stories, and that they want, interesting characters, and that's as wide and as varied and as open as, as everyone would want it to be.
Right. And Purnika is asking, what are some of the innovative ways beyond distribution and broadcasting do you think technology can assist theatre with? And yeah, we'll ask Sunil to address this one.
That's a tough one. I don't know, really. I don't know. We're all figuring it out, actually. It's just going to be a long learning process. So I really do. I have no real, knowledgeable answer to that. Sorry.
Anyone else cares to join? Yeah, Quasar, go ahead.
I'm just going to pipe in here and say, things like Zoom or OBS or things that earlier on were almost inaccessible to the individual, right? I remember a few years ago, Rehan, engineer, was working on something, and it was really hard to just get a live feed from on stage to the projection screen that was on stage, and then over time that became something that was quite easy to do. A lot of productions have used it. It's kind of grown into something. And I think these kind of technologies that we're talking about, like for example, OBS is what is actually converting all of us from a Zoom screen onto the Facebook and whatever with the patterning and all of that. And there's no reason that won't be useful in a theater scenario. Assume that we are still, if we're in a live space and we're still doing something like that, then that could be a newsroom. It could be anything that you want to convert. So just as the LED screen started, replaced Sunil's favorite, which is the painted backdrops, they got replaced by the LED screen backdrop. And yes, it is impersonal. It's not as cool. It's not as nice. But then there have been things that have been done with that to give dimension and space. And theater companies have then evolved in that. But it's made that technology accessible. Mm-hmm. And it's made that technology a little more affordable because it's being used more and more. To all of us who generally, our main technology is the human being. It's the voice, the body, the expressions. That's our base level. So every time there's a new development, it takes us a little time to access that and get there. So this is, I think, going forward, maybe these things will have a role to play.
Nirmal asked this question: have you had any experience of an unfortunate internet power issue on a crucial performance day on a scene in the past year? And how does it affect lag and the emotional scenes? I'm kind of going through it right now, so I think we can skip that one, but I thought it's kind of funny that one showed up. Achal Sharma asks, are there any aspects to the pandemic that you all think was a silver lining for the theatre industry? And that's a really interesting question to kind of wrap up and get some closing comments from all of you all for this discussion. We'll start with Neelam.
When the pandemic happened, and it was for 3 weeks, I thought I would read all the books that I had not read and had set aside, or I would clean the cupboard which desperately needed cleaning. But it never happened. But I think what the pandemic, in a certain way, did teach me was to be with myself. It taught us new ways of how to deal with aloneness, how to deal with a crisis that has completely fractured the world that we knew as it was, and to know that we've been able to manage, that we've been able to go through this process and still find ways of being alive, and also finding innovative ways of looking at theatre, looking at our tools, looking at many years of having worked in a particular way, what kind of metamorphoses, what kind of changes, what kind of choices that we start making in the work that we do. So I think, of course, it has changed us, because I feel it's like, The Plague, the book The Plague by André Gide, I think, André Gide, where he says that even when the plague was over, there was no way that the fear of the experience left the person. Whether he opened a cupboard or opened a trunk, there was always the fear of touch. And I don't know how soon we'll start shaking hands and hugging each other or sitting close to each other. All those things will go through. There will be a kind of hesitancy. So yes, I think we have changed in ways which we have also realized how to live in a minimal manner. We've also understood values of austerity. So there have been some very, I think, spiritual changes, to understand mortality, to understand life as transient, to know that death can happen to anyone at any time. So yes, there have been changes.
So, Sunil, over to you. And this is more in reference to the theatre industry, the silver lining we're looking for to end on a high note.
Sure. So I think, it was very expensive. I mean, the price has been too high, but it kind of, made us get out of many comfort zones and really re-look at our work. And that, I think that's always very useful. It also has taught us that, being flexible, being nimble, gives you a much higher chance of survival than being too deeply invested in large systems. Okay, so one of the big issues is that the large way of producing theatre right now is threatened more than the smaller production, simply because of the investment in a huge system. So I think there are lessons there. I mean, I'm not saying that everybody's got to think about this. So I think that for me, the pandemic has forced us to think again about what we do, to redefine what we mean by what does theatre mean to us. I think that's critical.
Bruce?
If there's a silver lining to it, it's been able to be part of things like this and meeting people from across the country and across the world. We've all been united by a common difficulty and loss and all the things that go with that. And I'm not just talking about loss of life, although that's probably the most crucial thing, but the loss of the way that we do things, of meetings, of interactions, all of that stuff. And in that is that it's allowed conversations to happen that may not have happened otherwise between groups of people who maybe would never have met. So that's been wonderful. I love meeting new people. It's one of the things that I love most about what we do. So being able to do that, we've still been able to do that.
Hugh?
I speak purely from a fan of the theatre, as someone who watches a lot and enjoys a lot of that. Something that we've been terrible at as a community has been archiving anything of what we do and how we do it. And we've always been running from one show to the next show. There are no photographs, there's no this, there's no that. And interestingly, I think the lockdown, the pandemic is terrible. But what the lockdown has done for a lot of theatre companies, including institutions like the NCPA and stuff, is to go back and say, okay, what is the stuff that we already have? It was originally with the purpose of putting it out there, but just the fact that act of what do we have and how do we then take stock and how do we look at stuff has then caused a lot of archival, which now hopefully will be very, very useful going forward. Sunil's Theatre Nama project, right? What he did, I don't think it would have happened if lockdown hadn't forced it. And I'm really glad as someone who's been watching theatre in Bombay for many, many years that happened, right? Because it was suddenly archival research. It was research about stuff that normally nobody talks about. And I think that has been a real positive for the community. And I do hope that it then is kind of a building of a foundation that then we can then springboard off once theatres are open and stuff. And I do believe that live theatre has a huge role to play when this terrible nightmare is over. because it's the few places where you go, you sit together, you watch something, you laugh, you're looking at someone with generosity, not with suspicion, right? You're not looking at the person next to you as though, they're trying to kill you by coughing on you. I mean, a person coughing in the theater has always been a terrible thing. Ask any actor. But, now it's taken to another level where everyone, is panicking. And Sunil at Tamasha, for example, when they reopened, they had this sheet, plastic sheet between the actors and the audience. And I know they had to do it for COVID protocol and stuff like that. But even that, I don't want that. I don't want that plastic sheet. I want to see the actor. I want to hear the actor. I want the actor to spit on me. And I think that the theater will have a large role in bringing people together to witness something and look at something with joy, because we've all been isolated with our mobile phones and our things, catching all the OTT stuff and whatever. But it's all been a one-to-one experience. I think the theater will bring us all back together.
Thank you. I mean, from my perspective, I've always been a big fan of theater and loved it, but I'm going to appreciate it even more. I can't just wait to go back to the Opera House and sit in my G13 seat and watch everything that's there. I mean, I fantasize about it sometimes. It's really that bad. But thank you, guys. I mean, you all have been, live theater is going nowhere. Digital is going nowhere. It's across the breadth of the arts. It's just not theater. It's going to be a hybrid mix of both. Many people have been doing such wonderful work, including yourselves, in the online space. And, it's thanks to platforms like Meta and what Teamworks is doing that this access has been available to a lot of people in this time where I think this, besides just having an outlet for actors and the ecosystem to perform, has also been for the viewers something that they hold on to, some resemblance of normalcy and the old life. And the arts has this enormous capacity to heal, and it's not just for entertainment or for whatever. So that said, I mean, thank you all for all that you all guys do. I apologize for the blackouts and all. It wasn't part of my black box kind of theatrical plan. It just happened by accident. It doesn't happen always, and it's Murphy's Law. Thank you, Suraj, for inviting me, and over to you. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I hope you all did too. Thank you.
Thank you, Neelam ji, Sunil, Bruce, and Quasar for such an incredible session. It was really, really fascinating to hear each one of you. It was an honor to have you all. Thank you so much for being part of this session. And thank you, Asad, for driving the conversation so wonderfully, and of course, making it so dramatic with your electricity coming in and out. And as a meta tagline says, what's life without a little drama? So what a fantastic and dramatic way to conclude Meta 2021 virtual series. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Hey guys. Good night.
Once again, we'd like to thank Mahindra Group for their unstinted support for the arts. Art and artists are truly valuable, and it's a collective endeavor to safeguard this age-old tradition and allow it to evolve and grow, especially in times like these. Thank you all for watching and being a great audience throughout this journey. If you like this conversation, please comment, share, and spread the word. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the notification for Meta's upcoming programming. All these conversations and masterclasses will be available to view later on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. Indian theatre was growing, experimenting, and evolving dramatically until the time COVID knocked on the casting director's door and asked for a role. Even though these are uncertain times and have impacted the industry drastically, we are optimistic that our community will be back on stage soon. With that, we at Meta take a bow and promise to be back soon with many new and exciting ventures. Thank you once again. Take care of yourself and stay strong. Good night.